stop panicking when you see things like, for example, a slight drop in click-through rate because your website might get cited in AI overviews or impression spike, but clicks didn't follow. Instead of starting panicking and asking, is there something we're doing wrong? How do we fix this? Take a deep breath, zoom out, think of how you define success. With this all AI features, new platform here, SEO is evolving in a different space now. So how we report on it and things like that, well, you also have to adapt. So if you're seeing, let's say, a small decrease in click-through rate, for example, think about, are you getting cited in AI overviews and ChatGPT and things like that? And if so, even if you're not getting clicks, that's brand equity. Is that considered success for your brand? Does that align with what you're trying to achieve? Is that considered future customer touch points, for example? So that's just one example that I'll give here. There's so many things we can be panicking about, reading headlines and seeing other people case studies and, all the changes and things like that. But to that, I say, take a deep breath. We know what SEO is about. And if you're doing that well, you're already ahead of the curve. I'm Jean Dejsuvan, and this is SEO in 2025, Additional Insights.
Jean, what's your additional insight for SEO in 2025?
Yeah, I think my insight more like a reminder actually as SEO landscapes we know is evolving at the speed of light these days to stop panicking. SEO isn't dead again. I think this is very important because as you know, every few months headlines start shouting SEO is dead. We saw the same thing with voice search, with social search, and now with AI and generative search. So when this happened, people start asking, when are we going to change our strategy and what are we changing it to? We need to pivot and we need to do it now. And to that, I say, we need to calm down, take a deep breath and take a little bit of a step back.
So why do people think that SEO is dead?
I think because of the changes that happened. As we know, Google is making a lot of changes and now there's ChatGPT making people not only just search for Google for information anymore, they use different platforms. And therefore, what you might start seeing if you work in SEO is that you might get less organic clicks or traffic to your site. You might start saying, is this dead? Do we need to start doing something new and just completely stop what we have been doing before?
So do you think SEO is changing significantly?
I do think SEO is changing like it has always been in the past 10, 20 years. And I don't think it will ever stop changing. I don't think it is changing drastically than before, because I think, again, the same conversation happened when there started to be voice search and then people started to search on YouTube. So I think we're just living in this loop and cycle of change as per usual.
Do you think it's always going to be called SEO for the foreseeable future?
I mean, there's been so many names, and recently I've heard GEO, Generative Engine Optimization, Generative Search Optimization. I think with different names that we are seeing, though, the foundation is exactly the same as everyone has been doing in the past years as we know it. I don't know what SEO is going to be called in the next 5 or 10 years, but I think what we know at the moment is no matter how much is changing, the foundation is pretty much what we've been doing for the past years.
Yeah, I mean, if you search for GEO, Google doesn't know what that means in terms of generative engineering and optimization. So I'm not sure if that's particularly catching on in the eyes of Google, but maybe it's catching on in the eyes of SEO. What does all this mean for new SEOs starting in the industry? What do they have to learn? What do they have to focus on? And how is that different from what it has been in previous years?
Yeah, definitely. I think what I will say that should be a focus, not necessarily for new people starting in SEO or whether you've been doing it for 10, 20 years. I think there's a few key things that we need to keep in mind and focus on without panicking when these changes happen. I think the first thing I wanted to mention is we should stick to the foundation. I think to those who have been working in SEO, we by now hopefully know what SEO is really about. So you just need to focus on making sure your content, your website is accessible both to bots and to users. And that means things like fast load time, structured data, internal linking, genuinely helpful content for users. I think we all know the deal. And if you are getting all of these right, if your website is set up correctly, if your content can be accessible by bots and users, and it helps them to match the intent that they are trying to, fulfill, you're ahead of the curve. And no matter how much platforms have changed or how advanced technology become, these foundations remain exactly the same.
Okay, so content, accessible websites, things like that. But in terms of content, does the way that content's published, the structure of content, has that not changed a lot because of AI search engines?
I think in terms of content, as we know, that's key focus on SEO. And it's evolved from just having keywords in there, keyword stuffing and all the black hat and stuff, now to genuine helpful content. And I think that is key. And again, that's the foundation we're talking about. So it depends on what your goal is for your business. If you're trying to sell them something, that salesy content might not work within either SEO world or GEO or whatever, GSO, the word that we want to call it. But if your content is genuinely helpful, help users make a decision on what is best for them, then I think you are ahead of the curve. If you show your expertise within that content, if it's something that users can't find elsewhere, I don't see the reason why it wouldn't work on any of the platforms that users can search for information. There might be slight change in terms of technical setup, for example, in terms of how you prioritize things, making sure not just users and Google can access it, but can AI bots access it. So that's just additional steps that you just have to consider. However, there's no need to scrap, the EAT or helpful content that we've been working on for the past years. That's something that you just need to continue doing.
So how do you ensure that your SEO skills stay relevant?
I think the way I understand SEO is that we are making data-led decision, and we look at search data, we look at user behavior from how they search on different platform. And if you go by that mindset, you can be sure that you will remain relevant whatever you do. If you just only think about, I need to add keywords in there without actually looking at whether search behavior has changed from the past 10 years to now, then your content will not be relevant because you're not actually serving the users correctly. But if you're actually looking at what your key target groups, what your users are trying to find, you incorporate that into your content, into your website, then you'll make sure that your content remain relevant and helpful to them.
Got you. Okay. And what about in terms of staying on top of what works now in SEO? What's best practice? Are there certain podcasts, websites, other resources that you go to ensure that you're up to date, your knowledge is up to date?
Yeah, I think for me, there's so many of them these days. On LinkedIn, I do follow a few people, and there's classic like SEO blogs that we read. I think one key thing I will say though is there's so many articles and researches and, surveys and things like that got published every single day about SEO. I think it doesn't really matter what sources you go to. You might listen to it directly from Google or someone who works with big clients. I think one key thing I want to touch on that is to really, what you need to do is to evaluate what you read and what you consume. Because again, as I said, there's so many headlines saying SEO is dead. It isn't. And there can be so many things like people started saying, there's this new thing, LLMs.txt, you need to start implementing it on your website. And then everyone started going away or deprioritizing everything they're working on, started picking this up. We need to get ahead of the curve. And to that, I think to go back to my original tip as well, the key thing is wherever you consume SEO trends or information from, just remember to evaluate before you act. Don't rush to implement. And there's a few things you can ask yourself on. So When you read about new things, I'll use llms.txt as an example here. Think about what is it? Does it apply to your website or your specific goals? Is there proof that this will benefit you? And is the reward worth the effort that you will, have to go through to implement that? I work on huge websites where implementing something like llms.txt would take huge amount of resources and also maintenance as well. So we spoke internally, and our technical lead, Esben Rasmussen, I also recommend people to go follow him on LinkedIn as well, looked at it, and we looked at the rewards that we might be able to get with this, and it just wasn't clear. And at the same time, we're working on so many technical priorities to set up the foundation of the website correctly, which we know will work for sure. So we didn't implement that yet. That wasn't in our roadmap yet. And that's the strategy. And that's part of what I would recommend everyone to do when consuming all these like headlines and articles as well.
So I like your advice, evaluate what you read and consume. Because I think for an experienced SEO, they can filter the information that they receive, that they read, that they consume, and decide what's likely to be the right advice for them and what advice to reject. But it's more challenging for someone who's relatively young in their SEO careers. So if someone's just maybe 1 or 2 years into their SEO careers, the big challenge is what information do you consume and what information do you listen to? What would your advice be on how to decide whether or not something is worthwhile listening to and implementing?
Yeah, definitely. I think it can be difficult. And as you said, there's so many research and headlines these days. I think, again, going back to my point about SEO being data-driven, I think look into the data, look into whether the result is credible. Does it apply to your website or what you're trying to work on? For example, some researches around e-commerce website might not apply to you if you're working on, let's say, educational, informative content focused. It also varies differently. And at the same time, I think if you have the resources and capabilities, always test things yourself. You can take what you learn online and what you read online. If you have the resources to do so, I would always try to say to our clients or anyone we work with, before we start rolling things out on a big level, like site-wide, we start with a small test to understand whether it drives the reward that we are trying to achieve here. And then you can evaluate whether it's worth the effort of rolling it out or not.
What's an example of something you've tested recently and what were the findings?
I think one of the tests, and I would like to mention here, and again, I think this is a perfect example of what we're talking about, is we have a client who is quite new to like social platform. And as the SEO world, our SEO team have been talking about, organic social and things like that. So we started a test by looking at the data, implementing, uploading a completely new, let's say, YouTube and TikTok channels for this particular client. However, it doesn't really work well with the nature of that business. The target audience that they are trying to target, they're not really using those platforms as the major platform in day-to-day to find the information. We started testing it. We optimized a few videos, let's say a handful of videos in there. We didn't really see the results that we were hoping to see. And therefore we said, this is not the area that we should be focusing on as of now. There are other platforms that we know is working for them where the target audiences are using day-to-day. So therefore, I think that's a really good example as well of, there's so much hype about social search, for example. But again, is it right for your client or for your goals?
So it used to be when I get started in SEO, that the dumb thing was to do in terms of testing was to have your own website, was to fiddle about with WordPress or back in the day, Dreamweaver yourself and actually see what was happening in terms of HTML code and tweak things and seeing what impact it had. And you could take your site and you could do more aggressive tests on it and get away with grayish hat SEO just to see how much you could get away with. Is that something that SEOs should still be doing nowadays? Or are there days when you have your own site and you do your own tests and it's gone and you just really need to just focus your time, your efforts on clients or business websites?
I think it depends on what your focus currently is at the moment. I would say if you have your own small website that you want to run some tests on, where actually in your day-to-day or your job, you're focusing on, let's say, 3 million URLs website, the result that you're seeing from your small website might not be applicable to those big websites. So I would say to that, you now have a bigger playground if they allow you to do so. I would say, why not, present the test ideas to them? You can run it on a smaller scale, select a subset of pages maybe, and do it there, because then that will really showcase the result on what you're trying to achieve on the same website category, the same industry, for example. But if the other website that you're working on is in similar scale to your website, then I would say that's definitely worth trying. And then you can go to them and say, here's some results, and that will get them a buy-in even more as well. I would say having your own website or your own sort of playground is always fun and recommended. And if that's what you find helpful and interesting to what you're trying to achieve within your job, then I don't see any issue about that.
Jean, what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
Yeah, I think the key takeaway is to stop panicking when you see things like, for example, a slight drop in click-through rate because your website might get cited in AI overviews or impression spike, but clicks didn't follow. Instead of starting panicking and asking, is there something we're doing wrong? How do we fix this? Take a deep breath, zoom out, think of how you define success. With this all AI features, new platform here, SEO is evolving in a different space now. So how we report on it and things like that, well, you also have to adapt. So if you're seeing, let's say, a small decrease in click-through rate, for example, think about, are you getting cited in AI overviews and ChatGPT and things like that? And if so, even if you're not getting clicks, that's brand equity. Is that considered success for your brand? Does that align with what you're trying to achieve? Is that considered future customer touch points, for example? So that's just one example that I'll give here. There's so many things we can be panicking about, reading headlines and seeing other people case studies and, all the changes and things like that. But to that, I say, take a deep breath. We know what SEO is about. And if you're doing that well, you're already ahead of the curve.
Jean Dejsuvan is an SEO director at MGOMD. Find her over on LinkedIn. Jean, thanks so much for adding your additional insight to SEO in 2025.
Thank you for having me.
I've been your host, David Bain, and you've been listening to SEO in 2025 Additional Insights, a Majestic series that complements the original podcast, video series, and book. Find out more at SEOin2025.com.